folks, welcome to the OKD Community Development Meeting for January 10th of 2023. It's our first meeting of the new year. Happy New Year to everybody. And let's take a look at the agenda real quick. Let me know if there's anything that's been missed. If you wanted to add it or remove it or move things around. Let's take about 30 seconds to look at that and see if there's anything that needs to be changed.
Jamie, you have the agenda in chat.
Yeah, 1 second here.
I got it there, Jamie.
Okay, thank you. All right, we good? Anything needed to be added or moved around or anything? All right, well then let's jump right to it. S&O documentation, how's that going? Did anything change since mid-December, our last meeting, or?
Dwayne, you're on mute.
Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, so I'm back now. So we are still working on it, putting it together, trying to make it clear and step by step, and just going through it and earning and learning, the way through.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah, so
yeah,
Dwayne and I are working. Sorry, Jamie. We're working together. We've created a couple of sessions. So we've broken. We've got a slide deck that we've split up, and then we'll do sessions separately. But I think Dwayne had a problem with his recording computer. So what we'll try and do, what I suggested, is we can do it together on a G-Meet call or maybe a Zoom session, and just work through the document and give examples of how we set up the HA proxy or the actual Apache server and so on and so forth. So yeah, it's a work in progress, but we're making progress.
Excellent, fantastic. All right, in terms of the Tecton, I did work on it a little bit over the break. There's a couple of tweaks that I need to make because of the namespace expectations in terms of the installation. But I'm making my way to finishing the Tecton documentation. And actually, I signed up as a Tecton user and I've looked at some of their meetings. And so I'm tempted to start attending a couple of the meetings in the Tecton community just to sort of be aware of what's going on and maybe to leverage some knowledge there to help us along. Email hosting. So we do have an update as of just 2 hours ago. They finally found someone who can modify the DNS records to point to the appropriate servers for email aliases. The question now is, where do we want these aliases to go? Those are the aliases. And so do we set up multiple accounts somewhere, or do we have these all go to one account and just look and just filter by alias to different folders? How would folks like to proceed with this? They just want us to get back with them with the aliases to set up. So we need to know where these aliases go to.
Is it going to be easy to change this in the future, or is this a one sort of hit?
It'll be easy to change in the future. It was the hard part was getting the DNS to point to the postfix servers that OSPO are using.
I mean, I would say then put everything into one, and then if we find there's a need to split one out, then we can do it when we need it. But I think the less we got to check, because the thought of having to go through sort of 5 or 6 email accounts log out, log in, log out, log in, just to see if there's anything there. I think everything going into one is going to be much easier. And then if we find that a different group of people need to do a different one, say something that's a bit more sensitive, then we may want to put that into a separate one and have a smaller group be able to do that. That's my thought anyway.
Okay, what do other people think? I see some heads nodding. Yeah, okay, that seems to be the consensus there. Okay, do we want to use that same Gmail account that's used for like the Twitter and everything like that? Since the credentials are shared out amongst like 3 or 4 of us, does that make sense? I think the chairs have it at this point. Brian, what do you think? I think you've got the credentials to that one as well, right?
I don't think I've got Gmail. I know I've got the Twitter account, but I don't know whether I've got the Gmail
Okay,
account.
so the Twitter account actually has a Gmail email address.
Oh, okay, so it's the same account.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I've got that one then.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one.
All right, and then we need to make sure, Luigi, that you've got that. That was on my task list for beginning of the year. Is make sure you have those credentials as well.
Diane gave it to me last night, so
oh, great, fantastic.
She wanted me to send out the tweet that we created a new OKD release, and so which was it's about virtually a month late, but nonetheless we've done it. So
oh, I thought I tweeted about that one, didn't I?
Did you?
Yeah,
I didn't see it.
The December 2nd release?
Yes.
Oh, I'm pretty sure I tweeted. Weird. Okay, I thought I did tweet about that one.
Oh, apologies. I didn't. I really didn't.
No.
See it.
That's fine. Maybe I didn't. I could have swore I did, but don't worry about it. It's fine. No. Okay.
Duplicates aren't problems.
Yeah, for sure. Let's see. 21 hours ago. Yeah, I did on December 6th. Okay.
Cool.
Yeah, I think it's, and then after that, I posted the video to the community development meeting from November 29th.
Brilliant.
Yeah, okay. All right, well, having multiple tweets on it is fine, not an issue. Okay, so we're in agreement that we'll have the addresses aliased to that Gmail account for now, and then eventually break things off as we get more volunteers and we see the need for redirecting. Is that the feeling in the room? Okay, see lots of heads nodding. Sounds good. Okay. Up next is social media. So since we last spoke, everyone's going to Mastodon, it seems. So what do you have for us, sir? You were going to gather some resources, so Mika.
Yeah, totally. So I put together a little document as like an introduction just to kind of help us have a durable piece of something that we could have for later. And I guess, Jamie, if you'll give me host, I can share screen and kind of go through it. Or maybe I have it already. Yeah.
No, I have to. Okay, share now.
Okay, let's see if I can pick the right one. Okay. I was going to do a slide deck, but then when I was putting it together, I was like, you know what, a document might be easier for us to kind of share and process and whatnot. Mm-hmm. So I guess maybe start with a show of hands, or like how many people here are familiar with Mastodon already? Like how deep should I go on the, so I know, so Jamie is like.
I would say go deep, right?
Okay.
Because there's going to be people watching this video that may benefit from it.
Good point.
Going deep.
So, okay, yeah. So the top of this, I just, put a little boilerplate on the front here, just letting everyone know that, really the point of this documentation that I've created is to share with the OKD community a high level perspective of what Mastodon is in comparison to Twitter, and kind of some of the reasons for what we might want to think about for why we might want to use it or not use it. It's not meant to be exhaustive about, what is Mastodon. Sure, there's tons more information you could get into, but this is just a high level kind of approach. So the first thing I did, what is Mastodon? And I just copied this from Wikipedia because I thought it was pretty good. So Mastodon is free and open source software for running self-hosted social networking services, right? It has microblogging features similar to Twitter. And the way it works is it's run by independent nodes that they call instances, and I will use that language throughout this documentation. Each instance is separate from the other ones and might have their own codes of conduct, terms of service, etc. So, how is Mastodon different than Twitter? The biggest thing, and this is alluded to in the description there, is it's decentralized as opposed to centralized. And what does this mean? Well, Twitter is a centralized service, which means that all the messages go to one point, and then the hub distributes out to the spokes essentially. In Mastodon, all instances are separate from each other, and they use a World Wide Web W3 standard called ActivityPub to share information between them. An ActivityPub is it's essentially a structured schema for sharing data, and one use of ActivityPub is to make something sort of like Twitter, where you could share little snippets of text and you can have addressees you can send it to and hashtags and those kind of things. But there are other uses of ActivityPub as well. You might have, in addition to Mastodon, there are other services like PixelFed is something that's very similar to Instagram. It's a way to use ActivityPub to share kind of like image updates and do those kind of things. There's also a service called PeerTube, which is very similar to YouTube, but built in a decentralized fashion. So ActivityPub is not only for doing Mastodon, but Mastodon is one use of ActivityPub. And in the community, in the kind of the wider ActivityPub community, this whole kind of sharing of all these things is referred to as the Fediverse. So if you use Mastodon or if you use PeerTube or any of these other services, you might see people referring to the Fediverse, and that's usually what they're referring to as the kind of the loose network of instances that pass along ActivityPub information to each other. I think it's important to note for us that each instance may have different rules about content creation and moderation, as well as each instance will have their own unique allow and block lists. This is kind of a big deal on Mastodon, and I'll get into that in the next topic a little bit. Another thing to keep in mind here as well is that in Twitter, because everything is centralized, Twitter uses algorithmic, I guess, processing to create curated lists of things that users will see. And so, the action of liking things or doing retweets, those actually feed into some sort of machine learning algorithm that helps Twitter to understand how to display these things. In the Mastodon network, this concept doesn't quite exist. There is not there is not some sort of central processing algorithm running that catalogs and indexes everything and creates search routines. So content is boosted to gain visibility. There's no inherent algorithm for curating that stuff. Another big point is the focus on privacy. So the Mastodon community and really the larger ActivityPub community, some of their founding principles and some of their cores have to do with user privacy and user safety, community privacy, community safety, those kind of things. And as such, Mastodon provides many more tools for users to ensure that their content is protected and their identity is protected. And the way that you would most frequently run into this is through things like allow lists and block lists. Some servers will choose to block entire other servers because they don't consider the content coming out of there to be safe or appropriate. In other instances, you may see just individual blocking of users who are known to, to be bad actors or whatever. But this also extends to the notion of some users also set up content privileges where you would have to ask them before you could get their content. You might have to ask them before you could follow them. So there's a whole range of kind of content protection measures that I think exist on Mastodon that may have some equivalency on Twitter, but it's much stronger on Mastodon. So this is something to keep in mind, is that the focus on privacy is one of the big points of this network. And as I mentioned earlier, searching and sorting. So Mastodon does have some search capabilities, but those are mainly around the use of hashtags and mentioned usernames. So if you mention a username in your content, in a toot, as they call it, this is the equivalent of a tweet. If you mention another username, that will get indexed by search engines, and any hashtags you put will get indexed by search engines. And really the hashtags then become like a very big way for communities to organize in the Mastodon, Fediverse, basically. So like use of hashtags is very big, especially if you're trying to find other people who are interested in your topics. So I think, probably the biggest difference is culture. There are many technological differences that, could be enumerated, but I think it's really worth highlighting that the culture of the community on Mastodon is very different than that of Twitter. And Twitter in general, especially at this point, has become, it's very commonplace to use Twitter as an advertising method or use it as a marketing place. The community on Twitter is very, they accede to commercial content quite well. It's known that this is part of the content. On Mastodon, by contrast, it's got a much more grassroots feel to it. And although there is usually pretty good community support for people who are like kind of showing off the work they're doing, or open source communities that are trying to share their latest changes and everything, there's a different community perception about like purely commercial marketing ventures. These are much less popular, and because the network itself has to be boosted by users who use it, there's really not a place for advertisers to work in the same way that they work on Twitter. So this is, kind of like another, big part of this, and it feeds into the culture of what happens there. So like, if you're used to using Twitter and you might think, well, if I like somebody's tweet, the algorithm will pick up those likes and then they'll like internally make it more important and make it more visible. On the Mastodon side of things, just liking someone's content is more akin to just kind of letting them know that you've seen it and you like it. It doesn't necessarily do anything for the wider network of people viewing. Whereas boosting, on the other hand, is very big. And this is like, considered part of the community. So, if you really like content and you want to see it promoted, you should really boost it in addition to liking it, because that helps to spread the content through the network. And so this is just something to kind of internalize as you think about Mastodon. So, this has been pretty brief so far, but, hopefully you can kind of see the shape of Mastodon and understand, kind of some of these things. And so the recommendations that I have after looking at this and kind of looking at what's been going on there, I think we should keep the Twitter account. We should keep using the Twitter account. From everything I can tell, although there's been some controversy around Twitter recently, and I think that's caused some communities to back away from Twitter and certainly caused many individuals to back away from Twitter. But it seems that even though the last couple months have been tumultuous, advertisers, many advertisers are still using Mastodon or still using Twitter, and many open source projects are still using Twitter. So I think it's still valuable for us to broadcast the message there, and we should keep doing so unless something really egregious happens in Twitter, like like some sort of policy change or code of conduct change that would make it unsafe for our users. But with that said, I think for the future, we should consider creating a Mastodon account and having it replicate our Twitter content, because as we're seeing, there is a migration of people from Twitter to Mastodon. And if there were disruptions in the future in Twitter that would cause even more people to leave, or maybe cause the technology not to work as well, I think we would be best served to have a backup or a redundancy that we could use to share our messaging. And more people are getting used to Mastodon as a way to see these things. So that kind of brings up the question of instance choice. And I just put a couple of suggestions here. I think if we do, or if and when we choose to make a Mastodon account, we should probably work with the community to figure out the best place. But I put some of the top places that I see projects going and people going. Fosstodon.org is one of the big ones. It's obviously focused on free and open source projects. The main accounts for like the Fedora project and Arch Linux broadcast on Fosstodon. And so it's a community kind of built around that ethos. So I think that's kind of a natural fit. It's also a relatively larger server. Mastodon.social is one of the really old, large servers. It's very large. It's kind of dedicated to general socializing. But I did notice that there are some news channels and other organizations that are broadcasting there, just because I think it's a place where you're hitting a lot of people. So that's probably another good choice to consider. And then lastly, the last one I put here is called Hackaderm. It's hackaderm.io. And they promote that they're dedicated to curating a community of technology professionals. And there's a lot of people from the wider kind of open source and Kubernetes communities who have gone there. I didn't see so many organizations broadcasting out of Hackaderm, but it's probably something that we should consider. And then, this join Mastodon server instances link that I have here, I put this here because, there are a lot of servers and many different, kind of, I guess, different qualities each one has that we could think about. So that's maybe something, something to consider as we get closer to kind of making a decision. And then I just put a summary at the bottom. We should continue posting our Twitter account. I think within the next 12 months, we should create a mirror of the Twitter account on one of the Mastodon instances and probably set up some automation that could just make it so whoever is putting stuff on Twitter, it's easy, it just gets replicated directly to the Mastodon account. Yeah, and we should make no plan to deprecate that Twitter account, at this time. So yeah, does anybody have questions or comments or follow-ups?
What are the implications of moving, let's say we're on one server and then we say, no, actually this server, we need to go to a different server.
Yeah.
What are the implications?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jamie. Yeah, so there are some kind of obviously it would be a little disruptive in the community side to see the name switch from one place to another. The Mastodon community has really good tools for automating that migration. So if we had an account on, let's say we had an account on Fostodon and we wanted to move to Hackaderm, there are tools that will automatically migrate all of your followers. It will migrate, I don't know if it will migrate your old content. I think that would still be on the old server, but everyone who is following you would get migrated, and the old server would have a pointer to the new place. So anyone who went to the old location would get forwarded to the new location. That there would probably be some people who would be left out in that, people who just maybe had a link or whatever, or had followed you and never updated. But in general, for anyone who's actively using the Mastodon network, they would get automatically bumped. And interestingly enough, I just went through this because right about the time, a little bit before the big Twitter disruption that happened recently, where we saw people going to Mastodon, the Mastodon server that I had been using before, which was called Mastodon.technology, the owner of that server ran into some family problems and wasn't able to continue the server. And so I actually went through the migration process, and it took about 72 hours, I think, for all of my followers and everything to make it over. But it was mostly seamless. I followed the automation. I did what it told me to do. And it kind of automated it all for me. So it's not too bad.
Do we have any other questions or comments?
I see Bruce asking a question in chat here. How is safe defined? I'm using that term very broadly, but in general, I mean like in a code of conduct kind of way. Usually, if I understand your question correctly, and please, Bruce, if I'm not getting this correct, definitely correct me. The Mastodon community, like I said, they've been very focused on privacy and focused on protecting individual users and whatnot. So when I say safe, usually what I mean is, a community may not particularly tolerate a certain type of content that comes across their door. And so some servers, deem other ones as, I don't want to say unsafe, but they put them on the block list because they don't consider that content to be something that their users want to see. And I think when we talk about safety, this gets into a much deeper discussion about, kind of how we're policing ourselves online. And I don't want to, I don't necessarily want to get into the opinion-based discussions about what's happening with Twitter and the content that happens there. But I think, one of the reactions to the Twitterverse and kind of why we see the Fediverse is that there are many marginalized communities and minority communities that exist in these places. And they have really desired stronger content control mechanisms so that, just so that I'm not having to see content on a daily basis, blasted in my face that I don't accede to and maybe is really violent towards my, way of existence or whatever. So I think that's kind of what I'm trying to get to when I just, threw out safe there.
Yeah, well, I guess my question is because that many words have been redefined over the last couple of decades. And safe used to mean physical safety, and it's often come to mean freedom from opinions that you don't like to hear. And my concern is because, like, this is a technical group, and I think we should avoid at all costs getting enmeshed in various political opinions, ideological opinions, the whole range of non-technical things. And Red Hat has sort of gone down that rabbit hole a little bit with banning certain words that might be offensive to some people, or at least some other people might think that they're offensive to some third parties, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that can easily become non-productive, and we're a small enough group that we can't really afford to balkanize based on some of these non-technical concerns. So that's just my overall concern. And I did see some information that in terms of the self-selection of people on Mastodon, by virtue of being increased by people that didn't want to be on Twitter for various political reasons. And I actually am not active on Twitter because of age, I suppose, as much as anything. But if people are fleeing Twitter because they don't like the politics and going to Mastodon, then they bring their politics to Mastodon. And I want to avoid all politics.
Yeah, I think those are great points, Bruce. And I think in general, I tend to agree with you about, like, for an open source project, we probably don't want to involve ourselves with the greater politics that are going on. And so that's why I think instances like Mastodon and Hackaderm are probably more in line with what we would want to do as a project than something like Mastodon.social that puts us into a much larger pool. I would think that, and honestly, like, I would want the community to decide. If we decide to have a Mastodon account, the community should decide like where it should go. But I think ultimately aligning ourselves with an instance that says, hey, we're dedicated to promoting technology, and that's kind of our main thing. And we find that their code of conduct kind of like aligns with our code of conduct. Those are probably good signifiers for us that we would be in the right place. But I agree with you. I wouldn't want to see us end up on some server that had, like, a very strong ideological bent to it, because you're right, that would kind of lump us in politically with the body of people who are there. So very poignant. I think that's definitely something we need to keep in mind as we go forward with this process.
One thing I would say is that you mentioned the code of conduct, and I was actually thinking about the code of conduct. We should link to it at the top of our meeting notes, and I think we can use that as a basis for interactions through Mastodon and our Twitter as well, right? Is just adhering to those things and expecting people that interact with us to adhere to those. And if they choose not to adhere to the code of conduct, then we can block them or something like that. I do think that we have to, without getting too deep into the weeds, make sure that the OKD community remains open to everyone, and that no one feels unsafe or unwelcome, right? So I mean, there's extremes to that and whatever, but I do want to make sure that people do feel welcome, and that some of the bad behavior on any social media, in terms of being abusive to people and stuff like that, doesn't leak over into wherever we go from here. I mean, we're lucky enough that our Twitter is so not really used a lot right now, but my understanding, looking at comments from people who have made the move, is that Mastodon actually has more engagement, like actual engagement with people who are interested in those particular topics. So that's the only thing that I would say is, with increased engagement, we want to make sure that the code of conduct is there for people to know that it's something we, adhere to. That's my opinion.
Jamie?
Anyway.
Yeah. One of the things if I could comment is that when you say we don't want people to feel offended or whatever, you absolutely cannot control how people feel.
No, I
can
understand.
feel,
I understand.
In other words, I can feel offended by red hats.
Sure.
Okay. Or
but
maybe I find that fedoras are a residue of the old colonial white patriarchy,
sure.
and have been associated with cultures that put people down and minoritize
I understand where you're going, Bruce. What
Armenians.
Sure. What I'm thinking is that we have a leadership, we have a code of conduct, and the leadership is tasked with enforcing that code of conduct and making decisions based on that code of conduct, their interpretation of the code of conduct. And so that as those things arise, that's what the leadership can look at and say, okay, is this, what is a reasonable interpretation of the code of conduct?
Yeah.
So that's let me, okay, go ahead.
No, Jamie, 100%. But for me, if we keep things technical and we stay and remain technical, the rest of the junk that's all over the show just doesn't take hold. And so, I totally agree with what you guys are saying. We don't want to get involved in politics. We don't want to get involved in ideologies. We're a technical bunch of guys that want to make open source awesome for everybody. And that's how we should stay.
Okay, I'm just going to caveat that with one thing that came from Diane last year, that I had to go through and do audits of all of the site because Red Hat supports I'm just reading it, the Inclusive Naming Initiative. And Diane said as a Red Hat sponsor community, we had to adhere to that. So I would just say that why I agree with everything you say, Bruce, just be aware that unless we as a community want to change that, we have signed up to support the Red Hat initiative, which is inclusive naming. So I think that's the only thing that's on our community page in terms of what may be seen as a political movement outside of a technical agenda.
Yeah. Go ahead, man. You got your hand raised. Sorry, go ahead, Elmiko.
Yeah, no worries. So like, just to bring it back to kind of the Mastodon part of this, I think it is a good point. I think we would continue to follow the same communications policies that we use with Twitter now. I think the real thing with reference to the point that Bruce is bringing up is that if and when we decide that we want to make a Mastodon account, we should make sure to choose one of these servers that isn't necessarily creating allow and block lists based on, some sort of political ideology or whatever. That, we make sure that we're kind of in the same place that other technical projects want to be. And I think that's kind of why I put Mastodon at the top of the list, because I found other open source projects there. And I went and I looked through their allow and block list, and I looked through the code of conduct, and that community is really focused around open source technology. And like they say, we're here to talk about open source technology, right? So I think like us associate, this is kind of like guilt by association, right? Whatever server we choose to be on, we probably should just make sure that we don't choose one that has a code of conduct that has language that, either goes above and beyond what we expect as a community or somehow clashes with what we've already signed up to. So I think just to bring it back, that I think that's kind of the real reference point here with regards to Mastodon.
So in terms of process, are we thinking that this group can make the decision, or do we want to move the discussion to the larger technical group in terms of deciding to go on Mastodon or not? I'm comfortable with us making the decision here now, yes or no. Does anyone feel that we should bring it to the larger group?
I feel like, go ahead.
So go ahead, Mike. I said this group is the community group, community liaison group, and I think this is community liaison. So I would support you there, Jamie.
Okay.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah, I mean, in general, I support this group, but I also want to make sure that like, and maybe this is something we need to think about as we go forward about how to make decisions. Like, do we have a mailing list for like just the community development part of this or something where we could say, all right, we could pose this question to the extended community development group? Because I just want to make sure that people who maybe couldn't make it today aren't necessarily excluded from the conversation. And I realize we got mostly everybody here, but you know.
Yeah, well, we can send something out over the working group Google group email list if you want, and just say, this is this document. Let's do a straw poll vote so that in the message that gets sent to the larger group, that we have a sense of what we've decided. Straw poll vote, yes on Mastodon, raise your hand, virtually or icon wise. Okay, so that's all of us. Can't see what you're doing there, Dwayne. Are you voting yes, no, maybe, don't know?
Thinking maybe in about 6 months, I would vote yes. Just want to give the year time to flow in, because there's so much going on with social media. You know, it's hard to see. You know, politics online are out of control. You know.
Well, I think we have a strong majority, so I think we'll probably, yeah, Brian.
Yeah, I was just going to say one thing. I mean, as we do this, I mean, I've stopped following that Google group in terms of I don't go and actively check it. And I think one of the things we need to do is, as we decide to support a channel, we almost need somebody responsible for checking it, because there's only so many hours in the day, and I don't think we're all going to sit on the Slack channel, the Google group, the Mastodon, the Twitter. I know that there are Facebook as well that I don't actually follow either. So I just think whatever channel we do, we either nominate a person or people and say that you're responsible for checking this at least, I don't know, it's going to be once a week, once a day, but we have we have somebody responsible. So there's no point in having a channel if people are following it and they're not getting any feedback.
I think we should have communications officers that are basically like volunteers, and we can rotate maybe every year or every 6 months. I think 2 people is good, because then if one person goes on vacation or something, we don't have to worry about figuring out who the next person up is, or they can take turns, or you know, do shifts, or however you want to do it. Does 2 people sound good? Is that reasonable? Okay, I'm willing to volunteer to be 1. Do we have someone else who wants to volunteer? Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Yeah, go ahead if you had something.
No, I'm just curious, what are we doing now for like, do we have like a communications team as it is, or is it just kind of ad hoc between?
It's ad hoc. It's me doing Twitter and Luigi now doing Twitter, and
duplicate Twitter.
Right. And then I don't think I do the Facebook occasionally. And the Facebook is the OpenShift Commons Facebook group. There's an OpenShift Facebook group that's run by Diane.
I mean, I'm wondering, would it maybe make sense for us to put together like a document for the community, like so that we can kind of organize around the like, here's where our socials are now. Here's how we're going to manage them, so that we can kind of propose like what you're talking about here. Because I would love to see this like as part of the community repo or something. We could just say like, here's our policy for how we manage it, and here are the people who you could get in touch with who are managing it now or whatever, you know.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. So let's create a document. We'll add that to the to-dos. We'll create a document that lists what our social media presence is, like where we are, the fact that we adhere to the community standards document that we have, and then list the people that can be contacted. And if we look at the aliases, I think we actually do have communications. So that would be, we would just have people email the communications alias, right? That may be one where we want to break it out eventually, because we may want to have that actually point to the 2 people that are volunteering, so it doesn't get sort of clogged up in the larger Google email.
Yeah, I mean, part of my concern here is like, you know, there's no pressure for us to rush off and create a Mastodon account. We can certainly take our time doing it. And I think it would be really cool if we had like if we kind of get our policies in order before we adventure into like a new social media zone. And then also like, I think it would be worthwhile to spend some time, getting some automation together so that maybe we could make whoever's job it is a little bit easier to monitor these things and whatnot.
Yeah. And you
Yeah,
said there
I was
are
gonna
some
ask-
tools for that, right?
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, Mika, I was going to ask, does it have a set of APIs that are available? Obviously, I would imagine you need some tokens in that. And then if you can, if it has got it, then it's easy to build it in a pipeline once we do our releases, just to update Mastodon and whatever,
Right. No, you're absolutely right. There is an API, there's a REST API for interacting with all these things. And and this is kind of side to what we're talking about, but there are even instances that are completely dedicated to bots. There's one called Bots in Space where all the accounts on that instance are just bots and they do bot type activities like copying messages and stuff like that. So I think in the end, like what would probably be like, I think there's a long tail to all this, which would be really cool, which is like eventually if we get to the point where our community is operating its own OpenShift, cluster at some point or operating like some sort of OKD cluster, we could even be running these automation out of an OKD cluster, really show people how we're using Kubernetes with, kind of the most current technology to create these type of things. So I think there's probably like some room for us if we can, in the next, year or two, if we can start to carve out like a community space where we could run things in OpenShift, we could use it to do these type of things. Like we could probably make some really cool stuff here that would show the community, how we're using OKD as part of our mission, right?
All right. So who wants to take up the task of sort of starting an outline document? You did so well on the Elmiko, you did so well on getting this information together. You interested in creating sort of a document that outlines what you just mentioned?
You mean for like the community, like interaction stuff? Yeah, I mean, I can certainly start on something. I'll need some help though. And I honestly can't agree to like take a ton of time, but if you give me like kind of a 2, 3, 4 week time frame, yeah, I could certainly work with some people, probably work with you, Jamie, and reach out to Brian and others to.
Yeah. Can we actually do it on OKD.io rather than creating separate documents? Because it's then in Git and it's in one place.
Why not?
Yeah. Just propose it as a PR to OKD.io. That's what I would want to do anyway. So yeah. Okay, so what I'll do is like I'll start a draft document and then I'll bring it in as a PR to OKD.io, and then we can just have all of our arguments there and everything.
Yep, sounds perfect.
Okay, cool.
Fantastic, cool. Well, thank you for all of this work, man. This was extremely helpful. And I think people watching this video are going to find it helpful too, that have sort of been wondering like what the Mastodon thing is all about. All right, any last comments on that before we move on to our last topic?
Yeah, I'm just gonna say like happy to share what I know here, and for anyone watching at home, like please don't go too hard on me for all the things I got wrong there.
All right, so the last thing I wanted to end with is prioritization, and just to sort of list out, we've got a handful of tickets, but what are our top 5? What are our top 5 things in Q1? Brian?
Fix the operators. Number 1, get the operator catalog.
I was thinking in terms of this group, but in terms of the community development.
But I think that is going to be. I think part of it is we don't have a way of engaging the community. I put a note in the end of December because I think we need almost a strategy discussion.
Yeah.
So, and it's like, how do we do that? Because I know a lot of these discussions will happen internally within Red Hat, and then the community sort of get to see the results. And for that one, I'm certainly happy to be part of the discussion. And then my number 2 would be covered what Anika already said, is getting some standardization and some automation to some of our community management activities.
What else are people thinking?
Yeah, I would add in something along the lines of, blog/videos/ help for people installing new OKDs. we had a discussion last time about overt, and actually last week the clueless people showed up for an unofficial meeting because I don't know, was there an invite? I think there was an invite.
Yeah, I think it accidentally, for some reason, it didn't, when I tried to delete ones to the end, it didn't delete to the end of the.
But anyway, we had a good, albeit unofficial, discussion on you know, like overt versus you know, Charo's, you know, KVM. I'm losing the acronym, you know, acronym city, but you know, basically the standard Linux virtualization. And Charo has been updating his massive blogs and you know, things, but so at the moment I don't think we have a finalized decision of what we want to prioritize on that whole stream of things.
Right.
So I think that deserves being on our list to
Well, yeah,
resolve
and we
where we're
want to
going on that.
surface the research, you know, we've got the research that Dwayne did, and we want
Right.
to surface the best of those articles.
Yeah, so
up
that
to
needs
the
some
top.
discussion, you know.
Yeah.
And maybe ordering and prioritizing as a subtask.
Sure. And what else?
Yeah, I would also venture to say, but I think it's part of the whole OKD single node stuff is OKD on edge. I mean, everything in the last couple of meetings we've had internally in Red Hat, it's the whole drive is going towards edge and the microshift things, you know. So it would be great to have almost a simple OKD install of OKD, you know what I mean, and on even getting it somewhere on a small Raspberry Pi or something. I mean, I know that's pushing the limits, but if we could do it, it'd be great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's some user cases for that, and that may be a way to pull in some community users, because Edge is a very powerful buzzword nowadays.
What was it that was the big? Somebody in our group was always asking about where things were, and could they get it on like a Raspberry Pi. It's someone that hasn't been coming to meetings lately, but I can't remember who it was, but we had someone that was a big proponent of it. I was always asking Christian about, well, can we do it? Can we do it? I can't think of who it was now. I'll have to look back on the meeting notes, but yeah, I mean, and we can actually bring this up. So I think at the next meeting, we'll bring this up, and then at the next main tech meeting, bring this up and bring the operators thing up. The operators thing, I think we need some clarity. We need to decide who to bug, or do we need to just do this ourselves? Like, you know, we landed on there being a separate catalog, but I don't know if it's being populated or where it's at, right? You know,
well,
so.
I think one of the problems, I mean, I sort of started looking at this. I don't want to go down too deep in the rabbit hole, but it's all the things that we do with the main OKD. Like, are we going to try and stay in step with OCP? Each operator has its own life cycle. It has its own update graph. And are we going to go separate? Are we going to stay in touch? I noticed that the operator repositories aren't all standard. Some of them actually don't have any tags that link back to, I think it's within PROW or some other repo of how they manage those. So there's a lot of stuff that we have to actually decide as a community in terms of the whole, how we're going to handle each operator, plus then the catalog as a whole. So that's why I say I think there has to be some community discussion. We have to base it off what OCP does, because that, again, that is the master source of truth. Right. So it has to come from those repos. But I think there's a lot of discussion in terms of how we want to handle that, let alone then the technology to go build it and release the thing.
Exactly, and then also not sort of overstep the boundaries with subscriptions on some operators that Red Hat don't want. You know, we have to, you know, there are going to be restrictions, yeah, and that sort of brings me to another point that at the moment our team is working on, and I'm also personally working with the OC Mirror interface, and it's building file-based catalogs, and it's a specific ask for IBM. And so if we do succeed in getting this thing done, it means that anyone can build their own catalog and push it to a remote registry and build their own catalog and consume that catalog how they want. Obviously, you know, within reason, that everything's signed and it's a trusted source. And these are the other issues that, you know, we could also look at. But yeah, you're right. It is quite a big issue there, Brian. So I think we should set up a meeting and discuss these things and go through them as a group.
All right, any other thoughts? Oh, yeah, go ahead, Almiko.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of follow up on that, I think, you know, Brian's question is really poignant, and I would love to kind of like ask the larger community, because like I have this notion of when I come to OKD community, I think like there's a lot of inspiration we could draw from the Fedora community, right? Especially in the trajectory we're going and everything, where it's like, you know, we're evolving OKD almost as this, you know, this is the community version of OpenShift, but it's also kind of growing as its own, you know, community, whatever, right? Kubernetes. And so, you know, like Fedora has their own package management system and everything, right? They have their own places for this. And yeah, I think this is a question we need to ask ourselves, is that if this community is going to continue growing in this direction where we would like to support ourselves and we would like to kind of really build a community, then it's like, doesn't it behoove us to start thinking about how we will host our own operator catalog, who we need to work with in Red Hat to understand the technology better, and then like who in our community is really interested in this? Because I think we've seen interest for maintaining certain, you know, very specific bits of the catalog, right? But if we can start to build this contributor list of, you know, people who are willing to own an individual operator or something in the same way that you might own a package in Fedora, then, you know, maybe we really can start to build this community out in terms of really we're self-supporting and we take the code, you know, or we share code with OCP, but we have our own ideas about like how we're going to use it and everything. So I would love to kind of get into some of those bigger questions with the community. So maybe that's one of my desires for Q1, is I would love to see us have these conversations and maybe figure out some things as a community.
Yeah, and I think we can start that next week. I'm almost inclined, personally, I would be inclined to take the approach like we did with the mail. I mean, the mail thing eventually resolved itself, the email thing, but it's like fish or cut bait, right? One of the things is that we've been told that, you know, the catalog thing got sidetracked. The internal work in Red Hat got sidetracked and they haven't worked on it. The internal work got sidetracked. Well, if it keeps getting sidetracked, it's actually harming OKD, and maybe we don't rely on them anymore and we like try to do it ourselves. You know, I don't know. Like,
Yeah,
I mean, the worst that could happen is that we need to switch back to the other catalog by switching, you know, the catalog reference.
Yeah, sorry, Jeremy. I think it is damaging an OKD because we can't use OLM community because we already have that pre-installed, and that pulls in the Red Hat OCP version of OLM, and many of those operators are broken because they point back to Red Hat built versions. Mm-hmm. So we don't have the community, and yet we don't have the Red Hat. So once you get OKD installed, to actually try and do anything on it is a lot more difficult than if I just go to Kind or whatever and use the OLM, because there are community operators that work in there, but the Red Hat versions don't, because the dependencies are in the Red Hat catalog in the OKD version, and they just break. So I think we need to sort the operators one way or another. My way is to take the public source code and build it ourselves. So we create an OKD build then we'd have no licensing issues. If Red Hat doesn't want something to be built, they shouldn't put it in public domain.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
we don't have any licensing issues there because we're not using Red Hat binaries, we're using community built binaries. But as you say, we then have to go and think about how do we sign them? How do we control them? So it's a trusted source rather than a free for all. So I think there's a lot of subtlety to these discussions that we need to get into, and it's not trivial.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to be mindful of people's time because we're right at time. This is good. And I think we need to have this discussion in the technical group because ultimately people need to hear this in the technical group and then actually, make some decisions and whatnot.
So Jamie, will we set that top of the agenda for next week then?
Yes, absolutely.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, so you're out, Brian? Oh.
No.
Do you want us
dear.
to move forward without you, or do you want us to wait?
Well, I think there's a certain amount of discussion to be had. So, I mean,
We can at least get
I
it
will-
started. Yeah.
yeah, we can start the discussions and work out who wants to be involved and how are we going to do this. Are we going to actually set up another regular meeting? Are we going to have ad hoc meetings? I think you can sort of move forward with it. There's a slim chance I may be here in 2 weeks' time, but I'm definitely not here next week.
Okay. Well, and I will make sure that that people's attention is drawn to, you added to that thread. Actually, I noticed a couple of weeks ago, and you mentioned that here.
Yeah.
I'll draw people's attention to that discussion, which is ongoing. Yeah, Dwayne.
Yes, and just to continue to add to everyone wanting to build out the community and the interaction, especially if some of the things we want to do need funding. Do we have a cost objective? I mean, I'm always working on grants. If there's a certain cost parameter that needs to be met to make things actual. I know one time we talked about, hey, giving people access, but then we need to screen them to make sure they're not doing bit mining or something. But, a way we can systematically bring in resources where our community can get into the prototyping, the testing, and if there's a cost there, what is that cost and how could we, and that's a long-term 6 months process. And you have to have delegate management with, outsiders who are actually contributing to OKD. So it's just something to think about if people are interested in that type of potential funding, if that is needed.
Yeah. All right. Well, we are at time. Oh, Diane. Well, how are you? Welcome.
I'm doing fine. Thank you very much. Yes, and I didn't get the UTC change, but anyways, good to see all your faces. I was only popping in because I was chatting with Luigi the other day, and that you got a release out the door, and congrats on that. And we were dealing with the Twitter handle stuff, which I'm sure Luigi regrets all of my typos. So anyways, I was typing very fast. I apologize for that. I was just wondering if what kind of feedback, if any, and if we had done any sort of blog write-up on the new release. Shireen or anybody had done anything around that I could promote, or if maybe I could get glean a few words from you guys and do that writing myself for you.
Well, I think, Luigi, what do you think? Do you think that there's something there to write about in terms of the...
Yeah, what we could do is just make note of the fact that that it was built with our pipeline, and even the release was created with the pipeline. Couple of words, and I could just quickly knock that up and send you an email, Diane, if that's okay.
Yep. That would be wonderful. And then I will use the normal OKD blog posting site process and do that. And next time I will come an hour earlier.
Okay. Well, it's great to see your face.
All right. Take care. Happy 2023.
Same to you.
Thanks.
All right, folks. We'll see you next week.
Yes.
Okay,
Thanks, Jamie.
just a reminder for anybody interested, the What's New in OpenShift 4.12
Saw that. Yeah.
is on YouTube tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for anyone that hasn't seen that.
Yep,
Guys.
don't miss it.
All right. See ya.
Thanks.
Take
Later,
care.
everybody.
Bye-bye.